3 years after President Bola Tinubu removed petrol subsidy, the federal government has now released a breakdown of what it says are 15.8 trillion naira in savings generated from the reform. The Finance Minister Taiwo Oyedele says the savings were shared across the 3 tiers of government, where the federal government received 5.43 trillion naira, while the states received 6.52 trillion naira, and the local governments received 3.88 trillion naira from the fuel subsidy removal savings, while additional revenue and borrowing also expanded government resources.
The government maintains that subsidy removal will reduce fiscal pressure and help prevent a deeper economic crisis. But as the government highlights the savings, Nigerians continue to grapple with the consequences of higher energy and living costs. The critical question, therefore, is whether the savings have translated into tangible improvements in the lives of Nigerians. Joining us this morning for this discussion is Public Affairs Analyst, Mr. Dayo Akintobi. Good morning to you, and thanks for joining us on Breakfast Central.
Very good morning to you. Good morning to Nigeria. It's a pleasure to be here.
Morning, sir.
Mr. Akintobi, the government says 15.8 trillion was saved from subsidy removal. How significant is this figure? And if you look at the politics, the major contenders said they were going to remove subsidy and that it was unsustainable. 3 years down the line, was it really worth the pains that Nigerians have gone through?
Well, the answer to that is actually yes and no. It seems to be rather apparent that the fuel subsidy regime was no longer sustainable, and just about every one of the presidential candidates did say they'd do something about removing it. So yesterday's press conference by the Minister of Finance was quite a welcome development, because at least now we can put a figure on how much has been saved. And the way it worked in the past was that this money, this almost 16 trillion, went into the pockets of a few oil marketers, never went into the government account, and never actually got to become part of the budget or part of expenditure. So now that money has been saved, it's gone into government coffers, it's now being redisbursed as FAC allocations to the federal government and the subnationals. So now we've got a figure. But the question now becomes, okay, so we see how much you've saved, but what have those savings gone into in terms of the lives of Nigerians? I mean, things are still expensive, life is still hard. How have those savings benefited Nigerians? So this is good for transparency, but the government needs to go a step further with accountability and begin to tell us that, okay, this is what we've spent the money on in terms of your daily needs. Here, transportation is still expensive. Food is still expensive. Healthcare, education. Sure, the subnationals are able to pay salaries. You don't so much hear of the states owing monies anymore. You know, they've caught up with pension arrears. And some of them have managed to start a few projects here and there in terms of roads, bridges, you know, building some schools and some primary healthcare centers. So we do see a little bit of development, but it's not commensurate with the amount of monies they're receiving. So as happy as I am that there's been some transparency, I don't like the fact it took 3 years for us to find out exactly how much. And there's still some questions about the accuracy of that 16 trillion, because there's some swapping, some ready buyer, ready seller thing where they were exchanging, you know, crude for. So is that captured in the 16 trillion or is it not? We don't know. But for me, I think this is a step in the right direction in terms of at least we have transparency now. We have a figure so we can begin to hold our leaders to account at all 3 levels and say, okay, so now we know how much you got. What have you done with it? You need to now be accountable for the money that's been given to you, including all the way down to the council chairman, you know, the state governor and the federal government. We cannot hold them to account because there's a number, even if it's just a beginning and we can't actually say it's exactly accurate.
And it's important that we hold them to account, because every time you speak to members of the public who are proponents of the current day administration, they would always say, oh, Mr. President has brought about, you know, policies that have improved the life of Nigerians. When you ask, the first thing you hear is the removal of fuel subsidy. And Nigerians have been asking, just like you mentioned, what difference has that made to the quality of our lives? Now, you're saying that this is a first level of accountability. They need to go further. How do citizens hold the government to account? How do they ask the questions? In what shape and form will accountability take place? Because someone watching might just be grumbling and thinking, okay, it took them 3 years to say this, even with all the pressure that we put on them. How much more pressure do we need to put on them for them to come and give further information?
Well, first and foremost, they've given a number. So that gives us a benchmark to work with. They've given a number. Now, they've also told us how the percentage sharing formula. So we have a rough idea. We can calculate how much exactly went to the states, how much exactly went to, the local governments, and how much the federal government got. In addition, we can begin to demand from our council chairmen things like town hall meetings on budget performance. We can demand for publication. They should publish the numbers. I've always said that, they publish the federal budget. They tell us, okay, line item by line item. So if they can publish the budget, which is just an estimate of what we think we would spend.
What they plan to spend.
What they plan. Well, also what they think they will receive in income and what they plan to spend. So if they can give us that, why not after the fact can they not now come and document
that this is what we received, though?
This is the reality of the implementation of that estimate. So we can begin to insist that, as I said, transparency is what they've done. Accountability is the second part of the equation, wherein I hear what you're saying, Olive, that probably it's the pressure we've been putting on all this time. So it's for the media not to relent. It's for the public also to continue to be demanding. A lot of people don't even realize that things like budget hearings, things like, they're open to the public. Yeah. We're free to go to our council when the legislature is meeting. We're free to go to Alausa or to any state legislature when they're having, these hearings. They're open to the public. But we seem to have a slight disconnect from politics. We just, as far as we are concerned, as long as the prices are right in the market, there's CNG buses that's giving us cheap transportation, primary healthcare center has drugs and can attend to us. We think that's the beginning and the end of politics. But politics requires active engagement, especially from the citizenry, whereby the only way to hold them to account is to confront them directly. They don't have an obligation to publish in the newspaper, but if you are there at the public hearings, you have the right to stand up and ask questions. You have the right to hold their feet to the fire. So I would say that our role in politics doesn't end with getting the PVC, which is how we see it. Once we've got the PVC, we've gone to the polling booth, we've carried out our civic duty, and we can go to sleep for the next 4 years. It doesn't work that way.
If you said, the obligation of not being able to publish what the monies are being used for, just again, we've seen the president just yesterday approving landmark projects. Take, for instance, let me see if I can run through some of them. Construction of new administrative and management block at the National Hospital at a cost of about 18.74 billion naira. Construction of modular clinics and theaters for different medical specialties at the National Hospital at a cost of about 64.92 billion naira. Another one, construction of high-end wing at the National Hospital at a cost of 103 billion, with a completion of 24 months. Election is in January. Construction of Neuroscience Institute at the National Hospital at a cost of 69 billion. And then, with Minister Taiwo Oyedele speaking, telling us what the money was used for. Reactions have led to people saying this is just a political dressing ahead of the elections. E.g., come and clear, so that the big question of what have you done with the subsidy money will not come up, especially maybe during debates or during campaigns, which have started yesterday. Right. Campaign started yesterday officially. And then these new ones. What do you make? Do you also see it as that it could be a political dressing just to ensure that the loopholes are tied going into 2027? Were
those items captured in the budget? That's the first question I would ask. Is that I'm not familiar with those as line items.
Absolutely.
But were they captured in the budget?
That's another question.
If they were, this is medicine after death, because it is at the point where they were put in the budget that we should have been raising this as an issue. That look, this is political window dressing. It is just simply to propitiate the anguish of the voters that you're putting all these, they call them white elephant projects. There's another term that's very interesting, it's called a boondoggle. If you call something a boondoggle, it's simply something that you do and spend. You spend a whole lot of money to just for effect. It's for show. It has a political purpose. It's not intended specifically for the purpose for which it's being constructed. So there's definitely some politics involved in this when you look at the rash of projects being approved at a time when the elections are coming up. But the last time I checked, it was an impeachable offense to even actually approve or commence or implement a project
without approval.
Without approval, you know. So politics has a role to play, but it should have a limit as to where and how it is deployed. For me, I think that this issue of subsidy savings, first thing to do is to allocate a specific portion, demand for allocation of a percentage of the savings to go to the things that improve the lives of the people.
So do you think the roads, I mean, coastal road, other constructions, also just to add to what I said, the president also approved construction of over 5, 6, 7 roads and repairs as well. New ones, both new ones, and of course, continued the repairs of the road. So people are saying, why roads? Is it a government of road? What's your take on that?
Well, he did say he'd be a government of infrastructure, but you have to be alive and well-fed to be able to utilize the infrastructure. If you're hungry, you can't leave your home to get on the road. If fuel is too expensive, you can't fuel your car, you can't pay for the public transport that you're going to go on the road with. So roads should be a secondary consideration after some of the very things that are life-affirming and life-sustaining, you know, food, shelter. Look at, for example, in Lagos, for example, the issue of rent is become so unaffordable now.
Please.
That how come some of these subsidy savings haven't gone into low-cost housing, for example? Social housing. Social housing, you know, how come some of these things haven't gone into agriculture support so that the cost of food can go down in the marketplace, you know? CNG buses, so that cost of transport can be less, you know?
The macroeconomics of it.
See, here's the thing. Macro is on paper. Micro is in our pockets.
Yes, the microeconomics.
So we've seen this report yesterday essentially talked about macro savings. But that macro savings has not translated into micro relief. Micro relief.
And that brings me to my question. Since they did the macroeconomic justification,
yes,
let's talk about what could have happened and how they can now get it to micro relief and affect people in their daily lives.
Yes.
They say everybody is a genius in 50-50. In hindsight, everybody is.
Hindsight is 50-50.
Hindsight is 50-50.
Yes.
So we've seen, I mean, 3 years down the line, we've known what they've done with this money and their justification. And Mr. Oyedele said he defended the painful reforms, outlining that some of the harms they prevented, such as salary collapse, said without freeing up these funds, at least 30 Nigerian states would have completely failed to pay regular civil servant salaries. He said hyperinflation of fuel, said the artificial fuel peg continued on its pre-2023 trajectory, Nigerians will be paying roughly 3,000 naira per litre today. They also said the primary goal was halting massive fiscal leakage from elite smuggling heavily subsidized fuel to neighboring nations. Meanwhile, we have NIMASA. We also have the Nigerian Navy and other security outfits there to prevent this sort of things. So looking at these justifications, are there ways they could have implemented differently with a human face? Or is he just crying wolf and painting a doomsday scenario to justify the removal of subsidy and the method of implementation?
I've always felt it's a cop-out to say that because 1,000 people or 1,000 entities are robbing Nigeria blind through this subsidy regime, so 220 million people should pay the price for the nefarious activity of 1,000.
Are they bigger than the Nigerian state? The
Nigerian state should have called those people to order, imprisoned them, seized their assets, forfeited everything they owned, gone after their family, gone after their ancestors, seized their family farms, the whole 9 yards. I don't think it's morally justifiable that 220 million people should suffer for the misdeeds of 1,000. So the whole thing was wrong-headed from the beginning. And the fact that it helped us to save money does not mitigate the immorality of it to begin with, because my view is every civilized country in the world subsidizes its people to some extent. If it's not energy, if it's not agriculture, transport, they're subsidizing something. Like in the UK, they're having a very harsh summer, they had a very harsh winter, so they give them energy credits, you know.
Even bus prices have reduced.
Absolutely. So every responsible government, if it accepts that its role is the security of life and property and the welfare of its people, will look for measures that reduce suffering and increase the opportunity for prosperity. That's the thing for me, is that all I'm hearing about subsidy savings and reforms and all is just, people are just trying to get by.
So in this breakdown, 3.14 trillion was absorbed by the government to protect consumers from paying fully deregulated high power tariffs. So the government paid, inside that your NEPA bill that you think you're paying a lot, the government has paid 3.14 trillion in it.
My question,
and they have sounded the alarm that next year
they're going to remove the fuel and the electricity.
So my question is, what's changed between or what was the previous administration doing differently, where it seemed things were somewhat easier for the average Nigerians in terms of the micro economics, and people could afford better cost of living? Let me read some numbers. Mr. Taiwo Oyedele says that monthly federation account allocations, which typically averaged 300 billion and 600 billion before 2023, now exceeds 2 trillion naira. See the jump? So they've made a lot of money. Then it says by July 2026, FAC distributed 2.8 trillion naira to the federal, state and local governments. June 2026. Then between June 2023 and December 2025, we know the 15.8 trillion. Now the breakdown of that 15.8 trillion, it says 5.4 trillion went to the federal government, 10.4 trillion naira to the states. All these numbers sounds like bankers counting the money, and the money is not actually their own. It sounds like those bankers who are, counting big checks. So what happened in previous administrations where we could afford to buy petrol for 180 naira? And even at that time, we thought we were suffering. And now it's a miracle if we get petrol for 1,000 naira.
Well, to listen to them tell it, and if you believe them, the previous administration was masking the deficit. They were masking the hole. It's like you living a deficit life. Your salary is X number of naira per month, but you're spending 3 times that because your local merchants in the neighborhood will allow you to collect the stuff on credit. So you're living larger.
Fake life.
You're living larger. Yeah. So that's how they're selling it, is that in the previous administration, we seemed to be doing well, but we really were not. And the reality was going to come with a big crash. If they had not come in, Sir Galahad to the rescue, parachuting in to come and save us. That if that hadn't happened in 2023, the crash was imminent. And that the crash could have led to a complete bankruptcy. I mean, the country would have failed completely. I don't think it was that extreme. I don't think. I think there was some propaganda in those claims. I think there was some fear-mongering as well. Yeah. I don't think it was that critical. Without a doubt, previous administrations, even the present one, have overborrowed. I mean, we're overextended, but let's recognize the fact that lenders themselves are not stupid. They won't give you the money if they don't confirm your ability to pay. So obviously, to give us the money, they've looked at how much oil is in the ground and recognized the fact that down the road, these monies can be repaid. But nonetheless, that put much pressure in terms of the income that was coming in, and it continues to be so this day. I mean, this government continues to borrow. So in what way is that actually different from the preceding administrations? I don't see any difference whatsoever at all. I think they're all going along the same trajectory. So
if we then find out that maybe they haven't made some profitable use of these monies, is it okay to say that, to backtrack on your policy and say, okay, we probably didn't do a proper feasibility studies on the impact of this. We're sorry about the outcome of this. Maybe we'll take a different... Do you see any reality where the government of the day will backtrack on that policy?
They're too vested in those twin policies that came
it's too far gone
in 2023. So there's no backtracking, but they can mitigate the fallout. They can still, it's not too late to pour massive money into CNG buses. It's not too late to give agricultural support. It's not too late to, do something about electricity, help additional refineries to be built. I don't think this notion of Kaduna Warrior and Port Harcourt refineries more billions should be poured into them and they should be resuscitated. I think those things are obsolete dinosaurs that should either be sold off as scrap and let's start from scratch. But if you have got a government behind you, you can build a refinery, a real formidable refinery in a couple of years.
Exactly, it's been done in the same country.
It's been done in the country by an individual.
Absolutely, by an individual who has upended the stereotype that is not doable. It's been done. So those are the kind of places where we should see government money going in because that brings real succor to the people immediately. We don't want to see just savings on paper. Let them translate into tangible things, on our tables.
I mean, during his presentation, the Minister Taiwo Oyedele said that he did see Nigerians go on the World Bank page and were telling them not to borrow us money.
More money.
And
Comment section.
And then he laughed and said, guess what? We collected the money. And that seemed like a pretty much a jab to Nigerians. That's what you want to say. But he made it clear that countries don't work that way. And we understand that borrowing is necessary, but it's what is being used for that matters.
Absolutely.
He did say that the state should try and boost their IGR. They should stop depending on FAC. What does this really mean, especially for states? We look at Lagos State. Lagos State makes a lot, especially from taxation, the Ports Authority, and so on. And still depending on federal allocation. Just July, a report says that all states got the highest. They got 3-point-something trillion naira being shared amongst the 36 states.
Yes.
But we've heard of this increment. They've gotten more money. Why is it that we still don't see the impact, especially on the lives of people, up until today?
Well, first of all, I think that government itself is too expensive. Government at all levels is too big. It's too convoluted. It's got too many branches, and it sucks so much money. I mean, when they talk about paying salaries, for example, that all this FAC has gone, all this new allocation has gone to paying salaries. It's paying civil servants. It's paying government workers, not private industry. It's going to government workers and government worker pension. So first of all, I think cost of governance is too much. It sucks away so much of that windfall, that times 3 times 4 times 5.
Yeah, about 6 trillion.
Yeah, that some states are getting. Most of it is sucked away already by paying past salaries overdue, current. I remember minimum wage went up by about double to 70,000. So if they were paying 30 before and they're paying 70,000 now, that's a big chunk of that
value.
Money. That's the issue.
The nominal value.
The nominal value buys less. The 30,000 bought much more than the 70,000 is buying now. But look, I think that notion of let the states generate IGR in the current federal structure that we have, it's a misnomer. In some cases, it's not possible. Okay, let's look at Osun that just had it. The governor, the governor-elect, or the current governor who is come back, he said it in his acceptance speech that he wants to move Osun from a civil service state to an industrialized state. So for now that it's a civil service state, it has no industry, it has no Fortune 500 company, no bank headquarters. How does it generate IGR? What's it going to come from? What? You're already taxing the workers. So where are you going to generate additional money from? Is it the person frying boli and ekpa on the street that you're going to ask
or
whatever the case may be? What are the prospects?
There's arable land, and they always argue that the best resource a country or state can have it is people. So if they apply themselves well, they would find creative ways of...
I don't dispute that at all. But for that to happen, the government itself has got to invest in the people to begin with. The government's got to invest in the people, invest in the land, invest in the environment. And then over a period, you begin to see it turn over in a way that it'll become IGR for you by way of corporate income taxes, by way of VAT. But if you're not a productive economy, how are you going to generate IGR? And I look at our 36 states and I say, boy, less than a third of them have any kind of possibility of generating any IGR.
I mean,
so does it mean that we might need to have a conversation about true restructuring? Because the federal government, and that's why all fingers get pointed at Abuja. Any little thing, the drainage in front of my house is not working, is President Tinubu's problem. Do we need to have a conversation about restructuring and also implementing the Orosoye report? Because we seem to live larger than our means. All you have to do is just look at the way civil servants move. I've been to Malawi. I've seen the presidency in Malawi move. The head of the Nigerian Federal Fire Service has more vehicles, more luxury vehicles in his convoy than the president of Malawi. And I will say that authoritatively. So some of these things give an illusion that, you know, we have this monies to dole around and to waste on things that are not really necessary. What will it take for us to really, does it have to come from the top, the personality of Mr. President to really to implement the Orosori report?
Well, I think the conversation on restructuring has already started subliminally through the back door. When you look at things like the push for state police, you look at the decentralization of the electricity sector, where states can now, regulate their own. You look at rail. So I think that conversation has started, and it will gather momentum over time. Now, when this administration came in, the president dusted off the Orosori report. He actually did. And created a committee and said they should go and look at it and come back with
the dust is back.
12 weeks. Yeah, the dust is back. The dust has gathered on it again. And when that happened, I was quite excited because I've always been a proponent of smaller government. I've always felt like we should
smaller
have
and efficient
part-time legislature. We should have, that they should collapse many MDAs into each other, and we should reduce the workforce. Look at all our young university graduates coming out now that can't get regular jobs. They're innovating. They're coming up with, they're designing apps on their phones, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. So necessity is the mother of invention. If we reduce government staffing by half, the fear, of course, is, the labor unions, the TLC, the the NLC, they will all be up in arms. But those people will find gainful ways to subsist, right? But at the same time, we've now cut government expenditure to where all 220 million of us can now begin to enjoy, the benefits of being what they call the dividends of democracy. Yeah. I think at this point in time, only a very small sliver of our population is even seeing the dividends of democracy, and it's based on the fact that government at all three levels is swallowing too much of our revenue.
I agree with you.
Too much.
It's why when the whole everyone tightening your seatbelt, fasten your seatbelt felt very unfair, because citizens would say, you are telling us to fasten our seatbelts, but we're not seeing you fastening your seatbelt as well. You are living lavish, you're not cutting your cloth according to your cloth, you are cutting it according to your size. So it's giving, do as I say, don't do as I do. Thank you so much, Mr. Akintobi, for joining us.
And just